Welcome back. Welcome back. After a summer break, here we are again as the weekly Zoom Bible study resumes. I'm glad that you are watching. We start a brand new study series, and the topic is the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is the fourth gospel, and it is very much beloved. In the Christian New Testament, we have the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they are known as the Synoptic Gospels because they approach the narrative of Jesus in similar ways in regards to the stories they tell and the timeline that they use. And then we have the Gospel of John. I love how Tom Wright, in his book, The New Testament in Its World, contrasts the four Gospels. He writes, Matthew takes us to the synagogue, where the people of God are learning to recognize Jesus as their King, their Emmanuel. Mark writes a short tract challenging his readers with the very ideal of a crucified king and turning it into a handbook on discipleship for followers of the servant king. Luke addresses the educated Greek world of his day and paints a picture of God's purposes through Israel's Messiah for the whole world. John, by contrast, takes us up on the mountain and says quietly, "Look from here. On a clear day, you can see forever." And he invites us to be still and to look again into the face of Jesus of Nazareth until the awesome knowledge comes over us that we are looking into the face of the living God. End of quote. Now, of course, the Gospel of John shares some common traits with the synoptics. For instance, they all tell the story of Jesus who taught in Galilee and Judea. All four Gospels record Jesus performing miracles and healing people. All four Gospels look back and use the Old Testament to bring meaning to who Jesus is. And all four Gospels feature the disciples and teach what it means to follow Jesus. In all four Gospels, there is conflict with the Jewish leadership, whether it be temple authorities or the Pharisees. And all four Gospels tell of the cross and the empty tomb. But for the most part, the Gospel of John is different. There is a different timeline of events, including the final week of Jesus. For instance, was Jesus crucified on a Friday, which the synoptics seem to teach? Or did it happen on a Thursday, which John seems to teach? Another difference, from the get-go, John is clear that Jesus is God. The synoptics, in my opinion, end up agreeing with John, but it's a far more subtle and nuanced journey getting there. And then we have the unique stories and teachings of Jesus found only in John. Can you imagine a Christianity without the grand prologue? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God? We'll get to that in just a second. Can you imagine a Christianity without that? What about a Christianity without the story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding at Canaan? In addition to those, only in John are we told about Nicodemus's nighttime visit with Jesus. The Samaritan woman at the well is a John-only story. Also, John tells us about the healing of the man at the pool of Bethsaida. And then only John tells us about the raising of Lazarus from the dead. and Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, and that long discourse that Jesus gave on the night before he was crucified. And it doesn't stop there. John also gives us different details about the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. And only in John are we given the story of that one-on-one encounter between Jesus and Mary Magdalene outside the empty tomb, and the story of Jesus and doubting Thomas a week later. And then only in John are we told the story of Jesus preparing breakfast for a group of disciples on a shore back in Galilee. And even though it was added much later, only in John do we get the story of the woman caught in adultery, where Jesus personally stops an act of capital punishment. Can you imagine a Christianity without those stories? I can't. So thank you, Gospel of John. As you can tell, I'm excited about this study series. I believe it's going to be a good one. I love the Gospel of John. And one of my main resources for this study is Amy Jill Levine's new book on the Gospel of John. It just came out a few weeks ago, and it's titled The Gospel of John, A Beginner's Guide to the Way, the Truth, and the Life. Now, that won't be my only resource. I'll be adding other resources, and I've got plenty of my own after over 4 decades of ministry. As you've probably already guessed by what's been said so far tonight is just the introduction. And there's no better way to introduce the Gospel of John than how the author does it, with the grand prologue. And it really is grand. And this prologue sets the stage for the entire gospel. It's like an overture of a great musical. All that we will discuss over the next few weeks will spring from the prologue in one way or the other. So let's read it now. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of natural descent, nor urge of flesh, nor human will, but born of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of a parent's only child, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me because he was before me." From his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. For while the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God. It is the only Son, himself God, who is close to the Father's heart, who has revealed God to us. Now, here are some of the themes from the prologue that we will encounter in our study over the next few weeks. And one of the first big theme is creation. It is impossible to read John's prologue and not think of the stories of creation from the first two chapters of Genesis. We know those in the beginning when God created the heavens and earth. And so now we have the Gospel of John reading, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. As I just said, immediately, just lights flashing right at the very get-go, we are told by John that Jesus is God. The Word was God. The divinity of Jesus is never, ever, ever hidden from the readers of the Gospel of John. But more importantly, Jesus is telling us, John is telling us that in Jesus, there is a new creation at work. And I can't put it any better than Tom Wright does. So here we go. John was writing a new Genesis. His whole book, opening with the words "in the beginning," which echo Genesis 1:1, is about how the world's creator has come at last to remake his world. John 20 is about Jesus' resurrection, but every sentence breathes the life of the first day of the week, the start of new creation. And then the climax of Genesis 1 is the creation of humans in the divine image. And then we go to John's prologue. The climax is when the Word becomes flesh. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and lived among us, corresponds to Genesis 1:26 and 28. So the lesson is the one through whom the world was made now becomes the one through whom the world is rescued and remade. So we have the theme of creation, a new creation. We have the theme of the Word made flesh. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus loves to talk about the incarnation. And then we have light and glory. And that is a big theme. Those are big themes in the Gospel of John. Again, going back to the prologue, what has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. Notice how I've underlined all the references to light. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. And then a few verses down, and the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, light and glory, the glory of a parent's only child, full of grace and truth. In the creation story, this is talking about the light, in the creation story, The earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And then a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. And at that point, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And just as the Word challenged and overcame the darkness before creation, now in the Gospel of John, the Word challenges and overcomes the darkness that is found in creation itself. And it is in John that Jesus declares himself to be the light of the world. And over, the theme of light and the theme of seeing comes up in the Gospel of John. I like what Amy Jill Levine writes about light. She says, light refracts into multiple colors, with white light being polychromatic. Light is always more than what we can see. We cannot see ultraviolet or infrared any more than we can hear sonic wavelengths. Thus, Jesus, the light of the world, can only be understood, as Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians 13:12, through a mirror dimly, or in the King James Version, a glass darkly. I threw that quote in there from Amy Jill Levine because to me, that just reminds us that there is so much more to Jesus than what we can fully take in. Jesus is much more than anything that we can imagine. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty exciting to me. And then, as I said, that other theme, glory. We'll get to it in our study. But remember, you've heard me preach this many times, the glory of Jesus in the Gospel of John is always the cross. But the glory that John talks about changes everything, the world and us. I hope I've garnered your interest, but more importantly, I hope the Gospel of John has. And over the next few weeks, we'll revisit the themes of new creation, the incarnation, light, and glory by looking at Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana, Jesus's encounter with Nicodemus at night and the Samaritan woman at the well, the healing of the man at the pool of Bethsaida, the man born blind, as recorded in John 9. We'll see these themes in the foot washing, and then in the post-resurrection stories of Mary Magdalene, doubting Thomas, and you know I'm going to talk about that breakfast on the shore. I can't wait, and I hope you will be here next week as together we begin this study by looking at Jesus's first miracle. Unto then, God's abundant grace and peace and light and glory be with you. Amen.